I refinished these old hotel nightstands that I thrifted a few weeks ago, but the longer that I'm looking at them, the more I'm realizing that I'm really not in love with the original cherry wood finish that I left on these burled drawer fronts. And I also think that my hardware choice could have been a little bit better. There is also some ghosting around the tops where I removed an original trim detail that I couldn't see when I was working on them out in the garage. But now that they're here in my kitchen next to the sliding glass doors with some natural light, it's just not something that I feel comfortable selling for top dollar. So yeah, I actually bought 2 identical pairs of these with the intention of refinishing one darker and the other in a lighter color. But before I start working on that second set, I need to take these back out into the garage and tweak things a bit. I'm gonna go do that, get the second set painted so that I can get both pairs listed for sale and share with you some tactics and best practices that I've found to be really helpful when I'm trying to sell my furniture flips as a business on Facebook Marketplace. For the past few years, I've donated most of the pieces that I flipped back into my community because I was able to earn enough to live on through sharing what I do here on YouTube. But I've got a 12-year-old who's about to get some serious orthodontic work done. The van that I used to haul furniture got totaled this summer. And well, the general cost of living here in Canada has gotten out of control. So I'm going back to selling for a bit. I do really love the burl wood on these drawer fronts. It was kind of the only nice real wood feature that these tables had. I'm not sure if I want to strip off the protective finish that's on here and stain them darker in maybe like a black wash finish, or if I should just call it and paint them. I'm going to try and stain them, so this needs to come off. I'm going to try this Green Easy Stripper today. It's a soy-based finish remover that's non-toxic and biodegradable, so a little less dangerous to work with than some other options. But the last time I tried it, it didn't do the greatest job at eating through the finish, so we'll see how this goes. I popped some tape onto the inside of the drawer holes to try and keep any junk from falling through and making a mess, and then I just poured a puddle of stripper onto each drawer. This stuff needs a few hours to break down the finish, so while it's doing its thing, I guess I'll start working on fixing these sides. This is what happens when I try to rush things to get a video out. I miss basic stuff like this, and the consequence is having to redo it. I still have about half of the pint of the urethane enamel that I used on here, so that's not really a huge deal, but it's a good reminder to myself that sometimes I need to slow my roll and make sure that stuff gets done right the first time. I put some 120 grit sandpaper onto my sander and smoothed out that line around both tables where the rope trim had been and made sure to blend the levels where there was original finish, where there wasn't original finish underneath the trim, and where I now had a layer of primer and paint. Next, another round of filler with this spot glazing putty from Bondo, which will fill in any wood grain texture and should give me a really nice, consistent level. Apparently, I've run out of 400 grit sandpaper, so I'm going to use a fine grit sanding sponge to smooth out all of this filler and make sure that this time I have a really nice blend between the bare wood sections and what's already been primed and painted. And then I'm going to go over the rest of the surfaces just to scuff up this enamel so that when I put my next layers on, they've got some texture to really grab onto. I decided to add some more primer to the sides to seal in the bare wood again, since I'd sanded off all of my original stain blocking layer. So I poured some of this shellac primer into a foil lined tray and rolled it on with a cheap foam roller so I don't have to worry about it sticking to the inside of my sprayer.
It's only been about an hour and a half since I put this on, but it looks like it's done what it needed to do, so I'm gonna scrape it off.
Since the Green Easy has a bunch of natural oils in it that are what help break up the finish, you need to use a strong degreasing cleaner after it to get the rest of that off. And that's exactly what their finishing cleaner does. So I sprayed some of that on, used a scrubby pad to get any more finish off that was still stuck on there, and then rinsed it all off with some clean water and a rag. I dug through my hardware collection to see what I already had that might work instead of these really traditional style bale pulls.
There we go. That's modern and contemporary, and they're adjustable, so I don't have to worry about the whole size. Boom. Nice. Okay, these are dry now, but there's still a little bit of finish left, so I'm just gonna sand with some 220 to get that off of there and get things nice and smooth. I have this black water-based stain from salmon, but it's pretty opaque, so I'm just gonna dilute a little bit of it with some water so I don't accidentally go too dark. Only need a little bit. I'm just gonna brush this on with a little foam brush and then wipe back the excess with a shop towel.
The stain only took a few minutes to dry since it's water-based, and then I masked it off and wrapped the rest of the drawers in some paper to protect those while I'm respraying the paint. One more quick smooth sand for the primer sections, and then I poured the rest of the can of Sherwin-Williams urethane enamel into my sprayer through a filter to catch any little clumps that might be in there, and sprayed on 2 more coats. When the paint was dry enough, I pulled the masking tape off and brushed some matte poly top coat over just the wood. The enamel paint on the rest doesn't need anything else. In the morning, I reset the garage and pulled out the next 2 tables, which are gonna get pretty much the same treatment with a few minor adjustments. They were in about the same condition as the first set too. Not awful, but definitely in need of a freshen up. More of a freshen up than this furniture marker touch-up attempt anyway. I pulled out the drawers, used a bit of Goo Gone to get this price tag adhesive off, and then went in for a really good scrub down of Simple Green, hot water, and my scrub brush Remember, these came out of a hotel, so there's no telling what's on these surfaces, and I don't ever want to be grinding junk into the substrate when I'm sanding anyway. Next, I grabbed my painter's tool and hammer to gently lift the rope trim off. I didn't actually mind the look of it, but it was obviously just an annoying little detail for dust to get trapped in, so for me, that means it's gotta go. I'm not sure why I bothered putting my sander away because I knew I was gonna need it again, but here we are. I popped some 120 grit on there and spent a good amount of time really thoroughly sanding this band where there were different levels and textures of finish until they were all the same level and super smooth. The laminate tops and the rest of Slick Finish got their usual scuff sand too, which helps the primer have something to grab onto and buffs out any shallow scratches or dents. And then I wiped everything down with a microfiber cloth to pick up any sanding dust that was left behind. Next up, some Bondo, the big guns. This is a heavy-duty 2-part epoxy filler where you mix the base putty with the cream hardener, which activates the curing process and helps it dry rock hard. I smoothed this around all of those heavily sanded parts to fill in the nail holes from the trim, any spots where I was missing veneer, and the epoxy in this is actually going to harden up the bare wood a bit, so it's a closer texture to the wood around it that's still got that factory finish on it. While that was setting up, I took the handles off the drawers and poured some more stripper onto that veneer so it could start working through the finish on there. More sanding to smooth out the Bondo, more dusting to clean up the mess, and then I busted out my primer again. Since these are a mix of laminate and I think cherry veneer, this primer is going to both make a strong bond to the plastic tops, and it's going to seal in any of the pink wood tannins in that veneer so they can't leach up through my new paint job and discolor it. This primer dries really quickly, so by the time I was done with my first coat on the second table, I was ready to go right back to the start and roll on a second. I left the stripper for about 3 hours this time since it didn't get through all of the finish on the first pair of drawers, and this stuff came off so nicely. I mean, it's gross, but also super satisfying. And again, I scrubbed it down with the finishing cleaner to make sure there were no oils left behind. Once the wood had dried out again, I smoothed it with a really light-handed 220 grit sanding. And then instead of stain this time, I opened up my paint color for these, which is Sherwin-Williams Sand Dollar, and watered down about a teaspoon of that. I brushed that over the burl wood and wiped off the excess the same way that I'd done with the black. I smoothed out my primer with the fine sanding sponge to make sure that there weren't any roller marks or little fluffies dried into it, and then I got things set up for paint. Again, I filtered some paint into my pneumatic sprayer, But like I've said before, you can always brush or roll a finish if spraying isn't a good option for you, because I know it isn't for a lot of people. But once I had my paint in my gun, I got to work. This is a urethane enamel. It has a 4-hour recoat time and then takes a few weeks to cure up to its full hardness and durability, which is typical of most paints. But this stuff is tough, and I've really been liking using it on my furniture because I can totally trust that it doesn't need any additional top coat. When I was ready to start the second coat, I just used a little bit of acetone on a shop towel to wipe off the tip of my gun and make sure there weren't any little crusty bits or clogs on there. If you want to play things safe, I would suggest emptying and cleaning out your sprayer in between coats with this paint. But I took a chance this time and didn't actually have any issues with clogs, so that was nice. When the second coat was dry, again, I peeled all the masking off the drawers and then wiped on a few coats of clear coat just over that veneer.
All right, now that I've got both sets finished to a state that I'm happy with, I need to get them listed for sale. And the first step to that process is some high quality photos. They need to be clear and well lit with a little bit of staging so that potential buyers can imagine what the pieces look like inside a home, but not too much that they can't imagine them in their own space with their own stuff. I just use my iPhone for all of my photos. No fancy equipment required. I like to put my pieces up against a blank light wall like this one here in my dining room or the one in my kitchen next to a window with some good natural light. I like to get a few shots of my furniture head on, so just sitting on the floor directly in front of it. And I make sure to leave enough room around the borders so that when I crop it down to the square size that Facebook prefers, there's enough room that I can still see the full piece. I also get a few shots from each side, close-ups of any interesting details, and the insides of the drawers and drawer slides or guides, because a lot of people will want to see that stuff when they're considering purchasing something secondhand. The app that I use to crop, straighten, and occasionally brighten my photos right on my phone is called Snapseed, but you can use literally whatever app you've already got that you already know how to use. Now that I've got my photos, I can get started on my listing. Engaging titles with catchy, descriptive words are super important. I always kind of like to think about what I would be typing into the search bar if I were looking for this particular piece of furniture, and make sure that you're accurate. Don't use words like antique or solid wood if it's not, or you're not 100% sure that it is. And once you've got your title figured out, you need a compelling description. We want detailed and enticing. You're going to highlight the materials used, the refinishing process. If it's got a quality brand name, you can include that as well. Don't forget to give accurate measurements, where the item's located, and whether or not you can offer delivery. I also like to add my social media handles so that people can come and find other work that I've done. Next up is competitive pricing. And as far as pricing goes, it's good to know approximately what you can sell a piece for before you even buy it. But once you're ready to pull your listing together,
Take a few minutes to go through your local Facebook Marketplace feed and see what similar things are selling for, but also take into account what big box furniture retailers are selling new furniture for. You just want to make sure that you're at least covering your expenses, like the initial cost of the piece, all the materials that you've invested into it, your time, and your experience. Remember that on Facebook Marketplace, you're targeting local buyers. The platform is designed for local buying and selling. So make sure that your location is set up in the app and add into your description how far or the area that you're willing to deliver or meet up for a purchase. You don't have to give anybody your exact address, but make sure that it's close so people know where the item is. Speaking of delivery, if you can offer delivery, you are going to open up so many more sales opportunities because you're making the whole process easier for potential buyers. If you can't or just don't want to, that's okay too. But the more convenient you can make things for potential buyers, the more appealing you are to those customers. I personally only offer local delivery and only for items that I can load into and out of my vehicle by myself. Make sure to join as many local buy and sell groups within the Facebook app as you can, and make sure that you're engaging, joining in discussions, and cross-posting your ads there to get as many eyeballs on your stuff as possible. And here's where I feel like a lot of people drop off. You have to promote your brand. You can't just stick a listing up on Facebook Marketplace and expect people to automatically start throwing cash at you. Create a brand identity. Figure out a simple logo and a style that you can use consistently so that when people see your stuff pop up in their Facebook Marketplace feed, they know it's you. There's recognition and trust. It really adds a layer of legitimacy that's going to weed out a lot of those tire kickers and lowballers that are inevitable on a platform like Facebook Marketplace. And you're going to start seeing way more actually interested buyers. Next, you really need to share your listings across social media platforms. I firmly believe that if you're running this as a business, you need to at least have a business Facebook page and an Instagram account where you can post what you're doing and people can go to look through your portfolio and maybe even get to know you and your process a little better. It also helps you reach a much wider audience. Back to the tire kickers for a second. There are always going to be those obnoxious encounters in sales. It comes with the territory, but it's important to remember to reply to any inquiries or customer messages promptly and in a friendly manner. It can be hard sometimes, but we have to remember that we are representing a professional business. And the last tip I have for you is when people do make a purchase from you, ask them to leave you a review. Facebook has a fantastic built-in review system where people can leave you a star rating or comments on their experience. And having a few good reviews on your page really helps build that trust and attract quality customers. I promise that if you are using these tactics, you will significantly increase your chances of selling your furniture on Marketplace and at a price point that makes it worth your while. Before you go, will you do me a favor and leave me a comment letting me know which set you prefer? Are you Team Black or Team Cream? I think I like the lighter set, but I'm pretty sure both pairs are going to sell fast. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel if you like seeing all the possibilities of what junky old furniture can be with a little bit of elbow grease. And I will catch you all next time.